Here's your sermon for this Sunday. Blessings to you. In February of 2005, a mountainous 30-foot boulder teetered above the Pacific Coast Highway, posing a serious risk to life and to limb. As Caltrans engineers studied the problem, they applied complicated calculations and equations to the situation. Conventional methods of disposing of this boulder were inappropriate here. Granted, it would have been convenient if they could have applied the approach of the holy rabbi of Nazareth and said, if you had the faith of a tiny pebble, you could say to this gigantic boulder, move from here to there, and it would move. Moses might have needed only to strike the rock to get results. The traditional approach for disposing of huge rocks like this is simply to blast them to smithereens. The problem is that such a blast generates what is called fly rock, which in this case would really do a lot of damage to the homes surrounding where this boulder sat. Fly rock is the sporadically deadly and often dangerous and destructive rock projectiles created when an explosive blast occurs. The Caltrans crew considered mud capping, which is basically dumping tons and tons of mud over the boulder, but no technique was commonsensical enough to wrap around this 30-foot, 1,200-ton boulder. The fly rock danger to a couple of nearby homes in the area of the boulder and the impracticability of completely covering the boulder prevented the use of explosives. The other methods used to destroy boulders, and each was perhaps considered to this one, including bursts of electricity from high voltage capacitors, slugs of water shot at high speed, or even steel pistons rammed and filled with water holes. In the end, the engineers used a supersized jackhammer, which allowed them to simply chip the boulder away. It took longer and it wasn't as impressive as dynamite, but it got the job done. More often than not, in our lives, we tend to deal with things in our own way and load up the problems of stones with dynamite wherever we can to explode life's issues to kingdom come, sending debris scattering every which way, injuring anyone nearby and sometimes even ourselves. So how do we deal with the boulders that hover over our lives or squat stubbornly across the road impeding our progress? More importantly, who can deal with this? Well, I'm glad you asked. God can and God will, and there won't be any fly rock. God doesn't need a supersized jackhammer, dynamite, high voltage electricity, steel pistons, or high-speed water to crack apart the rocks in our lives. The psalmist praises God, saying he splits rocks open in the wilderness. He made streams come out of the rock. He did so in the desert, and he can do it for us. The psalmist revisits a critical chapter in the lives of the Israelites. The writer provides in this song a listing of the awesome things God did for God's people. The author, perhaps a teacher or a priest, announces his intentions at the beginning. Give ear, O my people, to my teachings. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. Then he begins to remind his readers or listeners of God's past activities in their lives. Their enemies with superior weapons have been turned away. We see that in verse 7. God worked miracles in the land of Egypt, verse 12. God parted the sea to allow them to pass safely, verse 13. By day, God led them through a daunting wilderness with a cloud, and by night, by a pillar of fire, verse 14. And if that were not enough, God split rocks open in the wilderness and gave them drink abundantly from the deep. He made streams come out of the rock and caused waters to flow down like rivers. The reason the psalmist recounts these interventions is so that they should set their hope in God and not forget the works of God and keep his commandments. You would think that if you had a God who was acting on your behalf in this way, Described in the psalm, having hope would not be such a big problem. What's not to like about that? How hard can it be to believe that God will do it again? How hard can it be to have hope when you have a God acting and intervening on your behalf like this always? Sometimes God doesn't remove the boulder as quickly or as explosively as we like. At times, God simply chips it away. My dear friends, know that God is working, chipping away at the boulders that obstruct your life. God bless you. Amen.